Hello and welcome to this first ever White Art Collective lecture. I am the director of the White Art Collective, Jeff Winston, and this evening we are bringing the art of critique to you, or I guess I'm bringing it to you. This is something that I've put together. I actually wrote an article for the White People's Quarterly back in the issue number 2. I think it was 2019. And so this is based off of that. So that's kind of like a lot of this is based off of it. I've kind of refined some of the ideas in it. But let's see, before we get to that, before we kind of get rolling here, so we're on Shing tonight for the first time. So that's exciting. I need to check and make sure all of these are working appropriately. And I think, okay, yeah, I should be coming through. Let me know if I'm actually coming through on the audio. Okay, let's see. Good? Okay, cool. All right, so, all right, good to see you, not sorry show. Okay, cool. All right, excellent. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rolling here. I've put together a presentation, and I want to just go ahead and dig right into this. So let's see here. Let's see. Okay. So the art of critique. So we already kind of went through that. Welcome to the first in the WAC lecture series. And one of the reasons I want to do this is I think it's time for the art and culture sphere to develop our own school of thought. I think there's a lot of there's a lot of people with great ideas in this art and culture sphere, and we need to kind of bring those out more so that we can distinguish ourselves and what it is that we're doing and kind of what our goals are. And again, just it's kind of a way of viewing the arts and culture and how that kind of fits into the broader picture. We're going to try to do one of these every week. I've already got a couple people in mind that I'm working with to try to get lined up for the coming weeks, but we'll see how consistent we can be with that. Hopefully we can be consistent there. And we need peer review on this, and from people, of course, who have some kind of, who are coming from a place of knowledge of the arts. And that's something we're going to talk about. Somebody who has some kind of credentials. And speaking of that, I'm going to be presenting some of my credentials here in just a second. And that's so that, we need that peer review so that we can hone our thinking on these things. Okay, so, all right. Coming up after that, well, I already said that this lecture is based on the article I wrote for White People's Quarterly number 2, The Art of Artistic Critique. I recommend checking that out. Okay, I just, on the internet, it's basically you have a lot of people giving a lot of opinions about everything. Basically, everybody seems to be an expert on everything. Everybody knows everything. But what do they, a lot of times these are people behind anonymous accounts. We don't really know who the hell they are. So I want to put forward some of my credentials here. And again, not that everything's about credentials, you know what I mean? So you'll see what I mean here in a minute. Okay, so I do have some official credentials in the arts. I've got a bachelor's degree in film production and a near music minor. I know it's kind of funny to put it that way, but I was 1 or 2 credits from a music minor, meaning that I took a lot of college level classes on music and whatnot. But I've never let my schooling interfere with my education. Like Mark Twain said, I've always liked that saying, and I think it's a good way to look at it. The official education is good, but especially these days, a lot of it's very paused and comes from a weird perspective that, a lot of us don't necessarily agree with. So what are my street credentials, so to speak, right? So I've been playing music I've been playing bass guitar, drums, piano, and singing for over 25 years. It's actually closer to 28. Not that I'm super old, but I just started pretty young. So, and I'm proficient at all that stuff. Bass guitar is my best. And yeah, so I've been writing songs for over 25 years as well. And I think I'm pretty proficient at that. I've lived and played music across the U.S. in various art enclave cities, so like I know I have a good sense of on the ground of kind of how the art scene works, which is why, you know, so I have a good sense of like how it doesn't work for artists of our particular leaning and viewpoint. Okay, let's see. Let me just check around here at my. Okay. All right. So, and I've done scores for a couple of movies, a TV pilot, and a dance project, and actually a couple. Again, that's not nothing you've ever heard of. One of those movie scores was for a movie that I did. I'm also a filmmaker. The TV pilot never saw the light of day. The dance project got good reviews in the paper, but that's the thing about this too. Is like a lot of art projects, it's hard to get them to completion. That's something a lot of us deal with, and it's part of the art of just getting things produced at all. And I've released an album where I played all the instruments, and I've released stuff under the Jeff Winston project, I guess we could call it. Okay, so I'm also a filmmaker. I produced my own low-budget feature-length film and won an award at a film festival that back in Normie Land. And of course, while I've been working with WHAC, I've produced and directed a couple music videos: The Demons Among Us, By the Decency, Hyrith's Inside and Out, number of short films: Strawman 2, The Sweepening, The Woofy Wag, etc. Okay, and then of course I've been running the Spooky Short Film Contest and Festival, dealing with filmmakers and whatnot for 3 years. We'll be doing a fourth one later this year. All right, so I wanted to address some critiques of WHAC. I think this is very relevant to what we're going to be talking about, because one of the critiques that we've got over the years is that we're too nice and we don't critique our artist hard enough. And so one of the reasons for that up to this point is that just sensible white people who are artists basically have been so dejected out there and I've lived it, I've seen it, like out there in these art scenes all around. My experiences with the US, but I think this pretty much translates around most of at least Western Europe. But artists, like people of our kind of leaning and our thinking, are so just like kicked out of those art scenes, or just we don't get the support, that just getting people to create was kind of the first goal of WHAC. Just inspiring people, like, look, we need people to just make stuff, right? We just start making stuff. And I can tell you, I can attest to that. Many people have come to me and said, thank you so much for WHAC. Like it's the reason I started making music again, or it's the reason I started creating this or that again. And also it's inspired some people to just start creating to begin with. So that's good. And that's been one of our main goals and one of our main functions. And it will continue to be one of our main functions. Now, that said, we do want to start having more critique. And we do want to have that and provide that to the people who want it. And most serious artists would want their stuff to be critiqued by someone who knows what they're talking about. So basically what I'm saying here is, there's an art to critique, and there are not a lot of people that are really very good at it. So one of the other reasons too, I've been hesitant to just have people throwing around critique is because people who don't know what they're doing just end up making people want to stop creating, or that, artists tend to take these things very personally because basically their works of art are like their baby. So they'll take it to heart, even though the person might not really know what the hell they're talking about. But they might not know how to decide whether they know what they're talking about. And so that's what we're here to discuss, kind of basically how you would qualify critics. And, again, all people's like opinions and stuff being thrown around, unqualified people throwing around their opinions on the internet, it just creates a noise, whether it's about art or politics or whatever it is. It just creates a noise that, just exhausts us all and we get nowhere. Okay, so why start with critique? So there's a number of reasons for this. Culture is upstream of politics. I know we say that all the time, but I feel like a lot of people don't really fully grasp that yet, or it's a problem we have that, like, If that's the case, which it is, then we need to figure out how to cultivate and really build up the culture before we even get too concerned with any kind of political solution. But yet we're still here kind of in a rut, mostly just reacting to things rather than building up a culture. But that's what we're trying to do, and this education is going to be part of that. Art drives culture. I always like to use this example Joe Biden talks about how it was Will and Grace, which is a show created by artists, was what pushed the gay marriage agenda more so than any of the other marches or a lot of the activism that was ever done. It was basically like getting these characters into people's living rooms, getting people familiar with them and comfortable with them and to like them via TV and via the show. That's what convinced people more than anything to go along with the gay marriage, legislation and cultural change. So, and I think this is one of those instances where, you can hate Joe Biden, but he's right. And he's kind of accidentally being too truthful there, which he does sometimes. But that's a great example of just how art drives that culture, and culture is upstream of politics. Okay. So I'm saying all that to say that art critique is really important because it's part of the mechanism that legitimizes art to the broader community. And whether a particular artist or a particular piece they have, or even a particular movement, art critics, if you have like a proper kind of structure set up, art critics who are seen as legitimate can help to build that up and legitimize it to the broader public. And also art critique can help artists hone their craft. That's another thing. So it's kind of both of those things. Because without it, people don't necessarily know what they're looking at. You know what I mean? Because not everybody has all of the knowledge to really understand what does a piece of art really mean. There is a fair amount of background knowledge and interpretation that's required, which is something I'm going to lay out, some of the criteria of kind of the different bodies of knowledge you have to really accurately be able to assess a piece of art. Okay, so, all right. So, and I already kind of went over this, but everybody's a critic, but not everybody can give a legitimate critique. And this is something we're going to talk about in a second, but like opinion is not legitimate critique. We'll go over that. Also, another reason I'm starting with critique too is like I can't, I asked around with some people I know who are very well versed in the arts and have, got some like art schooling under their belts, and it's hard to find any kind of meaningful books or breakdowns of like, what does it take to be a good art critic? Is there some kind of criteria? What do you look at? Everything's very subjective and of course paused, but also abstract, so it's hard to get anything that you can actually like wrap your head around and to be terribly useful. That said, I will say that, so this is Brendan Hurd, The Decline and Fall of Western Art. His book is really good if you want to see how the far left used art criticism as kind of an entryway, how they used it to legitimize all the crazy art they were doing, especially starting in like the 20th century. It kind of helps you understand how the art criticism mechanism works and how it can be used for bad, but also we need to understand it to understand how it is we can legitimize what we're doing to the broader community. So, and I just recommend his book generally. It's a really good book, The Decline and Fall of Western Art, Brendan Hurd. He's Arias Press on Twitter, and I think if you just type in The Decline and Fall of Western Art, it's on Amazon as well. So, I'm talking about credibility and legitimacy and things like that. There's just generally a crisis of credibility. And I think that we have to, if we want to take our culture back or have any kind of say over our culture, we are going to have to jump into that vacuum basically and build up our credibility. And part of doing that is we have to kind of have our own school of thought that is seen as legitimate, a legitimate way of looking at art, but also to be able to legitimize the art itself to like the broader community, like I said before. And just an example of, you remember when Rotten Tomatoes was actually like pretty decent? You could go there and get a pretty good idea of like how good a movie was. And, this was a while back, like probably 10 years ago. I mean, it definitely became completely worthless like 5 years ago at least. But, they just completely lost their credibility because it became obvious that they were no longer actually like, just critiquing film honestly. They became like a promotion mechanism, and also obviously they were pushing like kind of the critical race theory kind of perspective, like with Black Panther and Get Out and other movies like that. But anyway, this, we live in this crisis of credibility. It goes beyond the art world, but for our purposes, it's just something we need to think about as far as like, how do we become credible? How do we make ourselves more credible and more legitimate? And I just added there at the end, like, all of this is like, I've just kind of come to this conclusion that like all of this is, I always thought it was bad, but it's even worse than I kind of previously thought, because I find that you can put something really good. Like there are some really amazing musicians and other artists, visual artists, poets in the White Art Collective. And you can put that in front of sensible people and it doesn't register with them. Like they don't understand what it is they're looking at. And that's another reason why I thought it would be good to start with art criticism, because we kind of have to have some kind of touching point from where to go. Okay. All right. So what does it take to be a good art critic? Much like any highly specialized field, art criticism requires talent and a breadth of both broad and specific knowledge. So I've actually laid out a set of 7 criteria that I think are basically like dimensions you can look at of a piece of art. And this is kind of this, I tried to zoom out on this to where it could basically fit any medium of art. So here we go. So the first one is in-group versus out-group preference or interpretations, objectivity versus personal taste, understanding the artist's intention, history of the artistic medium, cultural context, resources, technical skill and craftsmanship, and like the overall meaning, which is that's kind of a culmination of all those other ones added up, basically. So I'm going to go through each one of those criteria and just kind of examine what I mean by each one of those. So in-group versus out-group interpretations. So the thing about art is that it's very specific to a group of people and their culture. Each people have their own symbols, sounds, colors, and shared history that make up the artistic language through which they communicate to their own. So basically what I'm saying is like, it's basically impossible for a person from an out group to be able to decide the quality or the meaning or the legitimacy of a piece of art from a person from an in-group, for example, I think if me looking at a piece of African art, it's like, that's clearly not made. That wasn't made with me in mind. It wasn't made with me as the audience. You know what I mean? Of course it's not, I'm not the audience. So I can't possibly give a meaningful assessment of that. I can say that I don't like it. I can compare it to my personal taste or my in-group kind of culture, but looking at it as an outsider, I can't give any kind of meaningful assessment of it. And that also goes for Africans looking in on, like European art, or Jewish people looking in on European art. It's like in groups, it's not made for those, though, that out group. So they're not intended to understand it or get it or be able to get the meaning of it. I say this because, and this is like the first level kind of interpretation. And one of the reasons I put this in here specifically is because, European art and European culture generally has very much been under a culture of critique for a long time. And we've kind of just taken all of that with a grain of salt. But stepping back and looking at it, it turns out that a lot of that critique was coming from outside. mostly, in the media, Hollywood, and et cetera, a lot of that was coming from a Jewish perspective. And I mean, that's just the objective reality. And so therefore, like, it's not relevant because it's, like for instance, I wrote a song about Robert E. Lee. Of course, out groups are not going to like that. You know what I mean? That he's not one of their heroes, but he is one of mine. So that's going to have a meaning to me that they can't possibly understand. And I want, this is a big thing I think that I want artists to understand is that, when someone's critiquing your art, too many artists are very ready to just accept it and like, yes, tell me, dissect it, blah, blah, blah. But like, they can't possibly, someone from an out group can't possibly give a decent assessment of what you're doing. So it's just something to keep in mind. And that's also for people who, if you're seeing a critic or whatever, just know that they always come from their perspective of their group. All right. So that's one, probably obvious to a lot of people, but I want to lay that out. That's kind of the first layer. Then the next one is objectivity versus personal taste. So what a lot of people do when they first look at something, whether it's a song or a film or a painting, most people, and there's nothing wrong with this is just what we all kind of naturally do, is, we basically we look at it, kind of assess it based on our personal taste, like, oh, I like these color, like a painting, for instance. If I'm looking at a painting and I'm like, oh, I like how warm those colors are. And I like the subject of the painting. It's a knight, a knight in shining armor and rescuing a maiden or whatever. You know what I mean? Like those are taste kind of things. And a lot of people, that's the first thing that they tend to do is just judge things by taste. And I used another example here of like songs, people like songs based on, a lot of people have a handful of genres that they really like, or particular artists they like for whatever reason, the sound of their voice, the what they write about, like their personality, the way the instruments sound, or the genre, etc. But usually it's personal taste kind of thing. But yeah, the main thing that separates a good art critic from just a kind of your average kind of viewer is the ability to be more objective, basically. And nobody's like completely objective, of course, but to be more objective and also to have these other kind of bodies of knowledge to draw off of. So I put in here, not objective in the universalist sense. You kind of are trying to understand what was the artist trying to achieve? Because a lot of times when people are projecting their taste onto the artist, they're not really trying to understand like, well, did they do what they wanted to do? I think that's important. So a couple of the questions here, I think a good critic should ask themselves, like, what did the artist intend to achieve? And did they achieve it? And again, sometimes these are not easy to answer because you can't really get inside their head necessarily. But if you know what you're looking at, then you can consider those things. Like, for example, right? I'll put a couple examples here. The first one is like some people like to have like music that's got really lo-fi recording. It's low quality audio recording, right? Well, some people do that on purpose. That's part of the style of the recording. But a person who like mostly likes really highly produced pop music is going to if they're not really being objective, they're going to listen to that lo-fi and be like, oh, I don't like this because of the quality of the audio recording. But the quality of the audio recording is intentional. That's part of the artist's intention. They like the way that sounds. So if you're not taking that into account, you're not really being, you're not being objective. That person wouldn't be a good critic if they're like, well, it doesn't sound like pop and pop's what I like. Or another good example of intention is like, I'm sure we've all seen one of these, a movie that's trying to be scary. Like they're trying to have a tone with the music and the acting and the lighting and the sound effects and every element of it, right? They're trying to scare you, they're trying to create tension, whatever. And then like the monster looks really ridiculous. It's poorly designed, and or they show too much of it or whatever. And it ends up being funny. This happens to me a lot. I'm a big horror movie fan. So, people trying to be scary but end up being funny. Like if I'm critiquing that, I'm trying to get a sense of like, were they trying to be funny? Or, did they want it to be bad and funny? Or were they actually trying to be scary and just failed at doing that? So that's kind of part of how you're assessing. And like I said here, it might seem like it's requiring you to be clairvoyant, but it's just it's kind of part of the art critic's intuition and your broader understanding of the history of that medium and the cultural context. Like you can usually, and also even, let's see, yeah, I did add that in there. Also the understanding of the artists themselves. Like, if I were going to do a really proper critique of somebody's work, or like even like a film, let's say, since that's what I was just talking about, I think you should kind of get a sense of like, what is the artist about? Are they someone who takes themselves seriously? Is everything ironic? Is everything a joke? Are they funny? Like what were they trying to do? That can help you kind of get an idea of like, what is it that they intended to do? Did they actually achieve it? All right. So, and then after that, history of the artistic medium. No art exists in a vacuum, and if it did, it would probably suck. Get it? That's my joke that I like to do. So, all artists learn their craft. This is what I mean by that. All artists learn their craft and are influenced by those who've come before them. Their artistic ancestors, if you will. That might be a little overwrought, but that's what I put in the original article. But it's true though. It's like I do feel a connection to the artists that I learn. Like I'm a bass player. I love the bass guitar. I started playing the bass guitar because I love the way Les Claypool plays the bass guitar. And I wanted to basically, emulate what he was doing. A lot of people kind of start first, they're trying to like kind of mimic what somebody's doing. And then eventually you're going to develop your own style out of that, so he's kind of like, he's that for me, one of them anyway. So yeah, it's just to say that like, obviously we all, like nobody kind of comes out of nowhere. You have to learn this from somewhere. So when an art critic looks at a piece of art, to fully understand it, they need to have a historical understanding of that artistic medium. So like basically what it means is like, you're looking to understand how what they're doing fits into the broader body of work of that medium. And I'll just go ahead and use what I was saying about bass playing, right? So it's like someone who's really familiar with like bass oriented bands, like Primus or like the Pixies or Rush or Roger Waters, Pink Floyd, and there's tons of other ones, or Victor Wooten. Anyway, people who like know the bass world, you know what I mean? And people who know that instrument would be able to assess, when a new bass player comes along who's a great bass player, it's like you can actually go in and be like, oh, I recognize some of those influences. Oh, there's Jaco Pastorius, there's Les Claypool. Those are definitely a couple of mine personally. Etc. So then you can also, that helps you also to have an understanding of like, but this guy's, maybe this guy's doing something different. Like but he's not just mimicking those guys, he's doing something interesting. He's doing something new. He's kind of blending more styles or something like that. But that's just an example of like the artistic medium that would be in the base of like, you need to know what it is, kind of, some kind of context of the medium itself, so you can know like, what is this person doing? How is it significant to what's been done before? Are they cutting edge? That kind of thing. Yeah. So like here it's saying, is the artist doing something genuinely novel? Or they make something old and new, which is, a lot of times the case. It's hard to make something completely there's almost nothing completely novel, but I think every now and again, an artist will do something like really unique that's never been done before. Usually it's for circumstances outside of their control even. It's just like they were in a moment in time when all these factors all happened, you know what I mean? Like for instance, people who were, I don't know, like when guitars and things became electric, like, you know, and everything became electrified, that was a thing that was a big deal. And I think it was like the early 60s, you know, because all these folk artists were all acoustic. And it was a big deal when all the artists started going electric, like you were some kind of weird sellout or something. But like you could do new and interesting things. You could do genuinely novel things that had never been done before because this technology developed that it never existed. So that's just kind of an instance where something genuinely novel can pop up like that. But of course, making something old and new, that's something, you know, that happens a lot in our spheres, is because, you know, traditionalism, kind of reviving romanticism, things like that, you know, is something we talk about and think about a lot and people are doing, which is also important. You know, it's like basically taking those old sensibilities, the old craft, the old in that medium, but like making it relatable to the modern day, to the moment, to the people who are living now. And I think that's actually something we should do more of. And then is it adding or subtracting from the collective body of work, or is it forgettable and inconsequential? And it's all kind of the same thing. So yeah, I think those are just all good questions to ask as far as the history of the medium goes. Okay. So, cultural context. So, another dimension to understanding the value of a piece of art is how it fits into the broader cultural context of the era in which it was created. So, I keep using examples because I think it's easier to kind of understand what I mean if I use specific examples. And I keep using a lot of examples of like music in the 20th century, especially the later half, because that's something I know a lot about. So bear with me on that. But so anyway, so for example, to understand the musical movements of like the 1960s, which we were just kind of talking about in America and kind of the broader Anglosphere, you would have to understand how it affected the broader culture and how the broader culture affected it. You know, there's always kind of a feedback loop. Culture is upstream of politics, etc., but there is, of course, and kind of like social trends as well. But there's always a feedback loop as well, you know, kind of feeding back into culture, and then it kind of comes back around. So it's interesting, and sometimes it becomes difficult to say kind of like which part of this came first, etc. So, and that's, I say that too, and the later part of that is like, so you can tell, was that an advancement? Was that a cultural advancement? Was it an evolution, a devolution? You know, etc. So like songwriting is something I like to think about in the 60s because it evolved a lot. Up until that point, lyrics were more straightforward and simplistic in their subject matter that they addressed. Like stuff like Tin Pan Alley, but also like a lot of the like 50s songwriters, you know, is very like kind of straightforward, a lot of love songs. Feel good songs, stuff like that. You know, it's very, or old folk songs. A lot of that kind of stuff was very, very straightforward in the way that the lyrics were written. But in the 60s, songwriters began experimenting with a much more conceptual and introspective approach to songwriting. Like the lyrics were not just about like, I want to hold your hand, to, you know, a lot more introspective, sometimes neurotic, but not necessarily bad, you know, just more, spiritual questions, philosophical kind of stuff. And if that just permeated the broader culture, you know, of course, there's also a lot of drugs going on in the 60s as well. But I've always been fascinated by that period as well, just because of the cultural shift that happened. And all of this stuff is tied together with that. And of course, you know, those things happening in the art world and those kind of shifts in consciousness, those also those were affecting other artistic mediums, not just music, but like film and literature and the fine arts. And, you know, all of those things all influence each other as well. And that's kind of what I'm saying there with that next point. It's impossible to kind of know which kind of starts what, but they do kind of bounce around with a feedback loop. And and just end up more broadly affecting society at large. And I use that example because personally I'm a huge fan of concept albums, and I just think that's a really interesting development that happened out of that era. It's a very cerebral, conceptual kind of thing. Pink Floyd was really good at was one of the best at those, I think. I would argue it's almost like a high art. They're very complex in the way that they're produced. It's not necessarily classical music, although some of them had elements of that. But, point being, when I say cultural context, is like knowing what was happening in culture at that time and how it affected like the broader society. And then, so I'm just talking there about the Beach Boys and Sgt. Pepper's. Those were some of the other like first concept albums. And Pink Floyd. Yeah. But yeah, so knowing how the culture evolved is just, it's another dimension to consider, because to me it's like, if I'm really wanting to look at and assess a piece of art and like its value and kind of meaning to society at large, you kind of have to understand how did it affect society at large. Okay, another element to consider of the criteria that we've laid out here is resources. So advantages and drawbacks of having limited resources. I've been producing like independent media, music, film, other projects for a long time. So I appreciate being very efficient with resources, and I've learned how to do that. So on the one hand, most of the best art comes from struggle, and necessity is the mother of all invention. So that's great. But on the other hand, if an artist is never able to acquire the resources, I include time in that, to self-actualize, then that talent is lost to history and we are all worse off for it. So there's a balance to be had between those two things. And so basically what I'm saying there is that when I'm looking at a piece of art, and an example I like to use, filmmaking, because it's something I know a lot about, is you got to consider the resources that the people making it had. So I think a really good example is like low budget filmmaking versus like Hollywood level filmmaking budget. A lot of people, this kind of goes back to, people's, what they're used to and what their personal tastes are. A lot of people are used to being able to see Hollywood level production quality, which is nice. It's nice to be able to have like all of those professional people doing that, of course. But there's only so many people that can get their hands on those kind of resources. So there's a lot of low budget filmmakers out there that are making great stuff on a much lower budget. And so no, but that's going to show up, of course, up on the screen. It's going to show up in the acting. It's going to show up in the editing. It's going to show up in the music and sound effects and the mixing and the lighting and the special effects and all those kind of things. So I think it's just important to consider that, basically what I always qualify when I'm looking at something, and especially filmmaking, because in filmmaking there is such an incredibly broad range from like, you could have a movie that literally you made on your iPhone and with your computer that you like basically spent no money on, made that with your friends, or you could have a movie. Now there's movies with like almost $1 billion budgets, I think. I mean, it's gotten completely insane. I almost think it's morally wrong to spend that much money on a movie. But then again, if it were really good, I guess it would be okay. If it were really some achievement for mankind or something. But so the point is that obviously, if I'm looking at a film where somebody had a $5,000 budget, for me to go and compare them to the production budget and quality of a Hollywood film, it's just not fair. It's just kind of absurd. I'm not really looking at the craft of what they did. I mean, the point of filmmaking, as far as I'm concerned, is mainly the storytelling. So you could have somebody who's a better storyteller, better story being told, more seamless film with fewer, lesser resources. I mean, that's totally possible. Yeah. So that's the idea there. I think it's important to look at the resources. When you're critiquing something, try to get a sense of the resources, because that's why I get so frustrated. Why a lot of people get frustrated with Hollywood. It's like, how did you have that much money and you couldn't even get someone to write like a coherent storyline? You know what I mean? I mean, we all know why. It's because it's the money, and it's a committee made film, and etc. for profit. But yeah, so anyway, that's something to consider. Consider the resources, and including the person's time. I take that into consideration too when I'm looking at something, because time is a very important resource that a lot of us don't have very much of. I already said all this. Yeah, and basically the ending of that is just considering what the artist had to work with. Did they achieve what they intended? That's the basic, the rundown. Okay. All right, so technical skill and craftsmanship. This is, of course, another important part of assessing a piece of art. So here's some of the questions an art critic should ask themselves. Like, what level of talent are they working with in their particular medium? What techniques are they using? Are they proficient, advanced? Like I said before, are they doing something new that nobody's ever done? If you have a knowledge of the history of the medium. So, although techniques vary widely across artistic mediums, I think a really good way of gauging whether a piece transcends, it transcends mediums, is just seeing whether or not it's seamless, whether or not a piece is seamless, a piece of art. So what I mean by that is that when something is seamless, it's like the observer is not really aware of the medium itself. They're able to kind of be sucked into the piece and immersed by it because they're not worried about the piece, or the medium. They're not thinking about, oh, how was this made, etc. So I'll go back to what I know well. Filmmaking, you've heard people say, like, oh, that took me out of the movie, right? Like that bad acting, or that bad effect, or maybe there was like a bad choice of music. I've seen that a lot lately, like really weird, inappropriate use of music, like something goofy over something serious. So that's not seamless, right? So it takes people out of it. And I think that you could apply that to basically any medium. So you lose, when you're lost in the story, the visuals, that's seamless. When something comes across as effortless, and again, I think that you could have this definitely in a song, if somebody plays like a wrong note or something's out of time, like it takes you out of it. You're like, what is that? That doesn't sound right. Or even in a painting, a lot of people look at like modern art, and they're like, what is that? Why? So they're not sucked into it. They're not immersed in it. They're sitting there. They're very much thinking about the medium. Like, why is there a bunch of paint splattered? And you know what I mean? I guess you could argue that there was a time to do something that, well, that's actually, I do have an exception here for that. There is a time to break that fourth wall. But there's a time when you want to use that kind of as a tool in and of itself, but I think it's kind of overused personally. And sometimes it's kind of a cop-out for people who are just not necessarily good at what they do, or they just want to be an edgelord and, kind of like hit people over the head with the medium itself. And it's distracting, and it's not necessarily good art. So yeah, again, there's exceptions, but I think as far as technical skill and the craftsmanship of a piece, seamlessness, to where you're not thinking about the medium, you're not distracted by the medium, you're not worried about like, well, what did the artist do here and here? You're pulled into it. And of course, this is very high level, the technical skill and craftsmanship of every medium, and even, subsections of mediums. I was talking about bass playing earlier, that's like a subsection of music. There's ways to judge each one of those things technical skill. You can judge that, but that's a whole body of its in and of itself. So just this is all very high level stuff here. All right, we already covered that. Okay. So the final kind of criteria here is meaning. And actually, I pulled this from that article that I did from the White People's Quarterly. And what I mean by meaning, this is probably the hardest thing to do. Like these other things are like fairly, as quantifiable as something can be with art. There is still a level of subjectivity. We can be more objective, but not like truly, completely objective. But meaning is probably the hardest thing. You're kind of looking at all of those previous criteria and then looking at what does all of that kind of add up to, So ultimately, of all of those things, of its this person may be doing something novel, and they're doing something novel, and it's effective in a good or interesting way to the culture at large. They're very highly skilled at what they do, etc. Like, what does all that kind of ultimately mean? Just, what is it? How does that translate ultimately? And some of that is hard to put into words as well, because it is kind of intuitive. When you listen to a song, it is like, I picked Amazing Grace, I think it's hard to find something that like everybody loves, of course, but I think a song like that, even for people who aren't necessarily religious, it speaks to people on a deeper level. It has a meaning to people that is beyond, something that you can kind of quantify in a logical way. And so that's kind of what we're ultimately kind of, you taking the culmination of all these other elements and trying to decide, so what does this piece mean? What does it mean to us more broadly, And that's probably going to be hard to put into words, like I said, but that's kind of the art, I think, of critique also, is that it is an art in and of itself, in interpreting, kind of using some intuition, some artistic sensibility, an emotional sensibility to interpret an artist's work and help other people to see the value in it. So that's kind of that's what I'm getting at here, and what you're doing when you're kind of bringing all the pieces together and looking at the meaning of it. Okay, so I was going to try to put together like a demonstration of just of like how I would, I was going to critique something maybe that we've all seen or heard, but I just didn't have time. This, as you can imagine, this took a lot of time to put this together. So I didn't get a chance to do that, and I don't want to do it. The thing is, I don't want to do it without being very thoughtful, because that's a big part of this, right? Is like a big part of the point of this is that for a critique to be legitimate, it needs to be very thoughtful. If someone is putting all of this time and energy into creating the piece, then it deserves someone putting, not necessarily the same amount of time and energy, but a good amount of time and energy and thought into looking at it and assessing, again, I think this is a good breakdown of the different criteria that you can look at of like, what all are they kind of touching on here and doing different, and, what does it mean kind of more broadly? So like, I find that a lot of people are just, they're not, we kind of, as artists, we have to gain, we have to basically like rebuild credibility in the arts by proving that we are able to do the craft at a higher level. And at the same time, we kind of need the audience to meet us halfway and also try to look at a deeper level of what it is that we're trying to do. I feel like, the kind of like we're missing people. And so that's a reason I wanted to start this lecture series with the art of critique. is because we need to find some kind of common space where kind of like the artist can meet the audience, and we can try to come to a better understanding of what it is that we're doing, because culture is so important. Art drives culture. Culture is upstream of politics, and we need those things to be working for us, and we need that mechanism of art critique to help us hone in what we're doing, to gain credibility, to prove that we're worth our salt, but also to be able to legitimize what we're doing to the broader community. So yeah, I did do a demonstration of what kind of like a brief demonstration in that article I wrote in issue number 2 of White People's Quarterly about this. I recommend checking that out if you want to see that. And if there is interest for me to do like any more, like maybe another part 2 of this particular discussion, maybe I could dig deeply into something and like critique it. You know what I mean? And kind of look at it and analyze it, kind of using this. I think it's kind of a method is what I'm trying to develop here. It's a kind of a set of criteria to look at, but it's a method of like, here's the things you can consider. And I'm not saying that, not necessarily every critique has to include all of these things per se, but I just think it, perhaps it's a set of things that people could consider when they're looking at a piece, because those are the things that could, there could be something there. But anyway, all right, so I'm going to look through. Does anybody have any questions? Are there any questions? What? Any thoughts? Sorry, I've been trying to watch the chat. We're up on Entropy. We're up on Odyssey. Okay, let's see. Let's just look and see what's going on. We're up on YouTube and Shing actually tonight. Hey, great. Four Knowles over there on Shing, Ravi. Good to see you guys. Anybody have any thoughts, questions? Let's see. Hallandier says whack talk jokes are much better than TED talk jokes. Thank you. I appreciate that. That means a lot. TED Talks are the past. I'm not seeing any questions, I don't think. Let me see. All right. Kendra would like an addition to this topic. Okay. Anything in particular? Like, you mean you want me to do more on it? Like do like a particular demonstration, kind of dig deeper into specific elements? Let's see. Hey guys, thank you for tuning into this. I know this is I've been really trying to put a lot into this because I think the educational portion is really important, and that's something I want to roll out. And I'm reaching out to people out there who are listening and out in our sphere. I've already got some people I've been talking to, but I want to do more of this kind of stuff. I think it's really important. And like I said, we need to kind of develop our own school of thought. But also, you think about it, yeah, a lot of us have managed to make it through the ringer and we've developed our skills and things. But I remember when I was younger, I had no mentor. I was just kind of lost artistically, you know what I mean? And I feel like, we really got to reach to the younger folks who are up and coming artists, because I can only imagine how much crazier and more confusing things going on right now are for them. This is like the nutty what's going on in the world. So it's got to be hard to get your footing. So, I want to reach out to them and kind of help them get into some kind of framework for understanding what's going on and bestowing what I've learned, and also what a lot of other people in our spheres have learned. Because we actually have some really, really talented, and also some people with like some credentials as far as knowledge that they could bestow onto the broader community. And I really want to. WHAC is going to be working to sponsor that kind of thing. So if you're somebody out there who you feel like you'd be qualified to give one of these talks, a WHAC talk, then please, reach out to me, WhiteArtCollective at protonmail.com, and we'd be happy to do that. Yeah. And let's see. Candro, the hows and the whys, a path, if you will. Okay. Candro, I'll reach out to you. Let's talk about that. So Candro is wanting an addition to the topic, the hows, the whys, a path, if you will. All right. Sounds good. White Noise says how to reach the group of people who are taught in college about preserved animal corpses are just as much art as other forms. That's a good, yes, that's a good, it's a good topic. Or something we got to figure it out. Okay, let's see. Okay, so Dan says, before reaching out, I was afraid my music wouldn't fit into the frame of what you guys were trying to accomplish with Whack. But I love Dan's music. And no, it's good. That's the thing. It's like, we just want people to make good art. So if it's, and your stuff is really good, you make great music. So there isn't a prerequisite necessarily for it having ideological whatever in it, or that kind of thing. We just want people to make good stuff. Okay, let's see. Oh, dang it. I missed that comment. All right, guys, I'm probably going to wrap this up. Oh, here we go. Can you talk briefly about how critique was used to diminish the value of traditional Western art and promote subversive modern art? Why are people tricked into praising art that their senses tell them is ugly and dismissing art that their senses tell them is beautiful? I'm going to try to bring Brendan Hurd on to talk about that. He's written the book, The Decline and Fall of Western Art. And he has a really great section in there talking about how art critique was used as basically as a way to kind of like to legitimize that crazy, ugly art. That's part of what they did. So it's a good reading that I recommend reading his book. It's really good. He's got there's all kinds of other great points in it. That's just one element of it. But I'm going to have to try to bring him on. I'm working on that because he could speak to that much better than I can about the specifics of that. And see. Okay, thank you, We Are the West. Thank you, White Noise. Let's see, am I seeing any other questions? Is there any? Yeah. So I'm going to close up here in just a minute because I want to encourage everybody to go to the F&K premiere for Noel and Candro. New song dropping here in just a minute. And I think we're good here. I want to keep this conversation going, though. And like I said, if anybody wants to message me, feel free to email me, WhiteArtCollective@protonmail.com, or if you've already got a connection with me, just message me wherever we're already talking. Candro, I'd like to talk more with you. And I'll also, like I said, I'm going to try to get Brendan Hurd on here to talk about those specific elements of how they used art critique to get people to get into the ugly stuff. So, and like the horrible modern, art stuff. Okay. Oh, okay. So Rob is okay. Thank you, Rob. I'll have to figure out how to better set up my Shing channel, but everything's working, so that's good. All right. Okay, guys, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up so we can go over to the F&K. That's over on YouTube, I believe, on For Noel's channel. So, all right. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much, and we're going to let you go, and we will continue this discussion on another day. So I hope you guys will tune in for the next one as well. I think we're going to get one lined up for next week. So everybody have a wonderful evening.